Chatham, Icct. Tonight's program will start with some thoughts about why community gardens are important. Then we will hear from 4 local gardeners. We'll talk about how to start and maintain community gardens. They will be followed by a representative from North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service, and he will explain what resources they have available for community gardens. Contact information for all presenters tonight will be available on our Facebook page. So that's Orange Chatham ICC. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the program. So let's begin and hear why are community gardens such an important part of caring for creation.
Thanks, Anne, and hi, everybody. My name is Mary Ellen McGuire, and I'm the Pastoral Associate at St. Thomas More Catholic Church in Chapel Hill. And I want to thank everybody for inviting me to speak this evening. So I'm going to talk to you about why faith-based community gardens are important. So first, I'm just going to bring up my share screen. Give me 1 second while I bring that up. You can all see that, right? Okay. All right. So the title of my presentation is Seeds and Roots, Flowers and Fruits. First, an overview of what I'm going to talk about tonight. So we're going to start with just some interfaith common ground, and then the way I'm thinking about this, there are 2 different kinds of spirituality involved with faith-based community gardens. There's an inward dynamic, which I'm calling seeds and roots, and then there's also an outward spirituality that I'm calling flowers and fruits. So we'll start with the interfaith common ground, then the interior considerations, then we'll finish up with some of the outward considerations. So first, some interfaith groundwork here. So, we all come from different places in our spirituality and theology, but here are a few interfaith places of maybe intersection or overlap to lay some foundation from which we can all participate in the conversation together. First is we all share a care for creation. That's what brings us all together here this evening. And we have different ways of thinking about that. The Judeo-Christian tradition comes from a background of stewardship of the land. Some of our other faith traditions maybe talk about coming from the same stuff as the land. But in either case, certainly care for creation brings us together. Also, just a sense of holy ground. So whether that's a sense of God's giftedness in the earth or embodiment of God in the earth or just a spirit of the holy, there's all a sense, we hold some sense of holy ground. Faith communities feed people, so we often think about that spiritually. Some of our denominations have an eating component as part of our worship, but certainly there's also, we feed people in other ways besides spiritually, and we're going to talk about that tonight too. And the last thing, there was a monk from Mepkin Abbey in South Carolina, and he says we should put our faith in our hands, not only in our head. And so that's part of what community gardens bring to the table as part of this interfaith groundwork as well. So I just want to make 2 additional notes before I dive in. One is that I decided, just for purposes of tonight's presentation, just to focus on the faith-based aspects of community gardening. So I'm not going to be talking about community gardens, in a more secular sense. So there may be some things that I miss. For example, I'm not really going to be talking about the importance of eating local food versus imported food or anything like that. I'm just going to be specifically thinking about the faith-based components of it for us. And also along with that, these are some thoughts that I'm bringing to the table, but this is by no means comprehensive. There's just a whole lot to unpack here, but it will just be some things for us all to think about. For those of you who've been doing this a long time, maybe there'll be some new thoughts for you tonight. And for those of you who are new to community gardening, just take it all in and see what speaks to you. All right, so starting with seeds and roots. So this is the interior stuff that happens. So you know, there are lots of things that may prompt some interior reflections, prayer, that are beneficial, and some cases even unique to this type of ministry. So I thought that's where we would start. And a major principle here that comes to mind is to stop and notice. Stop and notice. This is a basic premise of my spiritual direction practicum that I took in grad school. Quiet yourself, slow down. And when we do this, that's where we tend to notice God. Community gardening is a great way to do this, to stop, notice, and slow down. And so I'm going to list here some ways that when we do stop and notice while gardening, these are some of the things that we might take note of inside of ourselves that maybe we wouldn't perhaps in other spaces. So first is nature relationships, I'm calling it. So here's a quote from Andrew Cassad. He says, "As you spend time growing a crop or a flower, you begin to develop a relationship with and can stand in astonished wonder of the life God has brought about. Soon you'll notice that plants have relationships with one another, the living wonder we call soil, wildlife, or livestock, and humans." So there's lots of relationship that when we stop and notice, we can begin to see. Constant care. Gardening takes constant care, constant attention, and what a neat theological reflection to think about the constant care that God gives to us, to me. Wonder at God's creation, also called biomimicry. So this is the recognition that God reveals something of God's self in the beautiful order of God's handiwork. A deeper awareness of God's gift. So whether this be food as gift from God or the land as gift from God, there's a sense of responsibility to care for God's creation, which is all God's self-revelation. And finally, I'd say that the stop and notice is really a life skill. So when we, the garden is a great place to begin to cultivate this as a spiritual practice, but when we can have a place of quiet and being outside and to really stop and notice things, that's a transferable skill to other parts of our life. And that's, again, where we can often see God. So my Jewish brothers and sisters may correct me on the pronunciation of this, but some other things that we might think about in this is Adam and Adamah, or Adam and Adamah. So we know it from Genesis in the Judeo-Christian tradition that that man was created from the earth. And so Adam means man or human, and Adamah means fertile soil. So when we're gardening in a community garden, what's the connection there for us? Something just to notice. Unity and relationships with the earth, certainly, but also with other people are all around us in the garden. So it's a wonderful opportunity to be side by side with people from your church that you maybe don't know or normally see. This is a pretty uniquely multi-generational ministry and multilingual. So this is actually the only ministry in our parish I can think of where people can work side by side, Hispanics, Anglos, Burmese, old and young, and all be doing this work together. That's a pretty special thing that this brings to the table for us. There's a Duke theologian named Norman Wurzba, and this is his quote: "Food is God's love made delectable." He goes on to say, "And eating well brings pleasure to God and witnesses to God's kingdom. Growing and sharing food is a vital daily part of our ministry as ambassadors of God's love." So our faith traditions herald God's love in nature, people, scripture, and prayer, but here also in taste. So food is God's love made delectable. Shared space. So one couple who donated land for a faith-based community garden said that the farm doesn't belong to them, it belongs to God. And working on land that doesn't belong to you and which is not self-serving, but it's a contribution to the common good, is something that begins to get us outside of ourselves and is a good segue to the next portion of this presentation. which I'm calling flowers and fruits. So this is the outward contributions of a faith-based community garden. So not only do they provide fertile soil for our interior reflection, but they also play a unique role in the social mission of our congregations in sometimes unique ways. So how? So here are a few ways that I thought of how. So first, community gardens make a statement that our faith community cares about creation in a very visible way. Our community garden at St. Thomas More is the first thing you see when you get to campus. And I can't think of a better way to herald that creation care message, except maybe solar panels. But those two things are very visible and a great way to make a statement. Selflessness and simplicity are values that the community garden brings to the table for us, kind of over and against a consumeristic, individualistic society and this desire for more and more. Peter Moran is the co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, along with Dorothy Day. And he said, he was a big community gardener, and he said the goal was, quote, to foster a society based on creed instead of greed, on systematic unselfishness instead of systematic selfishness, on gentle personalism instead of rugged individualism. Also offers the opportunity for organizational community partnerships between sponsors. So an example of this is Anahath Community Garden up at Cedar Grove Methodist Church in Northern Orange County. So they've partnered with an organization called Volunteers for Youth for work in their life skills. Another example of this is there's our Common Home Farms out near Olympia, Washington State. That's a tri-partnership between a Catholic university, a Catholic parish, and a Catholic high school. And so all three of those come together in the community garden. So it's just a nice opportunity for that outward partnership, I'll say. Teaching opportunities abound. So in the time of Abraham Lincoln, I read 90% of Americans farmed, and today only 2% of Americans farmed. So this is something that we've gotten away from as a culture. So faith-based community gardens very simply can teach people how to garden. They can teach how to set aside the phone and to work in quiet. They can teach about nutrition and healthy eating. They can teach about exploitation in the food industry, low pay and the working conditions for migrant workers. They can teach about all steps of food production. They can teach about food appreciation because food takes effort to produce. Feeding the hungry. So a lot of faith-based community gardens have a component of donating some of the crops to local shelters or soup kitchens, and often have a part of the volunteering will involve serving the food to the recipients. Another aspect that was part of the victory gardens in World War II was that people were encouraged to grow gardens in their backyard to grow food locally so that there would be more opportunity for other foods to be shipped overseas to people, to the troops that just didn't have food opportunities in Europe. So something like that is something we could think about today, is to grow the food locally and consume that here. Uh-oh, I just got a note my battery is going low. I'm just going to go across the room and plug this in. I'm sorry, bear with me 1 second. I know from experience, if I don't do that right away, it will go dead. Okay. Less food waste. So, you know, it takes a lot of effort to grow food. And so as people participate in community gardens, they're less likely to waste food on the table going forward. Gratitude, you know, it fosters gratitude in people that receive it. Some recipients of some community garden food said we could taste the love. I love that. They could taste the love. And finally, these community gardens at our faith communities model what community is like. You know, these are people working together with a common purpose, side by side, with people of various ages, various languages. What a beautiful image of God's kingdom. So finally, here's a story to bring this all together. This is from Randy Senzig from the Fuquay-Varina University Methodist Community Garden. And he shares this story. From 2008 to 2013, I gave a project assignment to my AP environmental classes to journal about their experiences working in the garden. They were in work in the garden 5 times per week for 10 weeks, and they write a journal entry for each workday. That was all for a major grade project. Their entries were as varied as the students, but here were the general themes, some of which surprised me. Under the supervisor, while pulling weeds, they observed the natural world of insects, spiders, birds, and their behaviors. They learned how and when to plant while learning to talk to elders, immigrants, younger kids, and others. Teenagers usually only talk to other teens. Parents called me explaining that their child who never ate vegetables was eating raw vegetables and insisting that fresh vegetables were cooked for meals. They also learned the importance of providing fresh vegetables to the local food bank so least fortunate folks could have fresh vegetables too. Most of the students earned an A+ on this project. Community gardens can be a beautiful interdisciplinary education, and it meets some of the essential standards as well as developing the inner being for love and care of our neighbors. In closing, faith-based community gardens are ministry and witness. They foster creativity, productivity, unity, gratitude, and creation care. They breathe in and then send forth the love, community, and joy of faith-based communities to others, and for this we give thanks. Now let's hear from Paul and Pat Kelly from the Franciscan Community Garden in Raleigh about how to start and maintain a community garden.
I have to unmute us.
Many thanks, Mary Ellen, for inspiring us about why community gardens, both spiritually and concretely. We are Pat and Paul Kelly, and we're from the Franciscan Community Garden in North Raleigh. We are very grateful to OCICC and Icct for allowing us this chance to share some ideas about how we started our community garden that may help you. For those of you who are familiar with Drawdown, I'd like to say thumbs up to community gardeners for growing sustainably. Their efforts are vehicles for Drawdown.
Maybe I got that right.
Carbon dioxide feeds the plants while restoring the soil, and growing locally allows us to limit our use of fossil fuels for transportation. In fact, both regenerative and conservative agriculture are really high up on the list for cutting back on carbon dioxide emissions to our atmosphere and actually drawing down. Thank you, Paul. We have worked in the Franciscan Community Garden since its inception 10 years ago, when it was just an idea, and have been blessed over the years with many volunteers who have differing skill sets and range in age from preschool to senior citizens. It's been a wonderful community opportunity. Preparing for tonight, we had a chance to sort of travel back in memory lane and we stay amazed with the folks over the years who have contributed to their time and treasure to making the garden what it is. In the beginning, it sounds biblical, doesn't it? In the beginning, in order to manage all the information that was coming our way, we put together a 4-inch notebook that has grown clumsy and overstuffed over the years. But we did divide it into 6 areas that may be helpful to you. One was site plans, 2 materials, planning information, organic, disease and pest control, administrative, and spiritual. All of those we've been able to go back through over the years. As we begin to look at startup gardening ideas, there are a couple of things we'd like you to keep in mind. One, gardening, any gardening, but community gardening in particular, is not a straightforward journey. Rather, it's a confluence of tasks that come together dependent on your circumstances and what others bring to your endeavor. Do think in terms of baby steps. Choose your goals and make them reasonable so that they match the resources and time you have on hand. In fact, our first year, we now have 25 beds, but our first year we were happy to have 2 4x16 foot beds that grew maybe less than 100 pounds. Also, I think an important thing in this time of climate change is to understand that in addition to your successes, you're going to have failures. And I like to look at those failures as Mother Nature teaching you how to adapt. So, you know, don't let the failures get you down. Okay, so we're going to look at a diagram, Paul. Will you put that up? The diagram breaks down our tasks into 4 areas. One is building support and networking. The second one is research. A third is decisions about the structure of the garden. And finally, physical needs, the bottom line. Tonight, we're going to just focus on the first 2. All right.
Hi, I'm Paul Kelly, Pat's husband, garden gopher, hole digger in the garden. When we started thinking about tonight, it became apparent that there's just too much to try to share in a very short period of time. And what I'd like to ask is, Ann said our contact information will be available. Please reach out to us. Even better, come by and visit the garden. We would really like that. Again, as Pat said, each garden is unique. And all I can do is share some of the things that were successful for us and hopefully will be of help to you. It's probably the biggest thing to starting the garden is getting buy-in and then maintaining enthusiasm for the garden. It was fairly easy for us. We had a Care of Creation committee at St. Francis that came up with the idea that it'd be terrific to have a community garden. And from that, we approached our pastor who signed on. And we have a fairly large campus that includes not only a church, but a school and some other facilities. And so our director of facilities management was the next person who was on board. And so that was our core starting group. The next thing we did was try to promote ourselves. So we used our parish bulletin to get out notices about what we were up to. And we would host potlucks and have a guest speaker or a movie. In the spring, we would have germinating. And frankly, food is always a good way to get people to come out. And the food was really good. The other thing we'd do is, being on a campus like we are, when events would take place, we would volunteer to staff tables and talk about the garden and ecological kinds of things. Some of the opportunities we had with the school were things like Earth Day. They have a justice fair. We'd have at the parish welcoming for new parishioners. So that gave us opportunities to reach out. I'd say if there was a single tool that has helped us be successful, it was Pat's creation of an email on a weekly basis. And people ask to be on that email list. They don't all show up, thank goodness, because I don't know what we'd do with 100 people coming to the garden on a Saturday. But the truth is that in that email, she's able to specify what it is we want to accomplish. And when there are bigger things that need to be accomplished, it's amazing how the right people and the right talents show up to get the job done. It's been truly a miracle. The email also allows us to celebrate accomplishments by individuals and groups who've come out to help the garden. Everybody seems to take pride and interest in how much poundage did we donate to feed our fellow citizens. Most of our produce, I'd say 98% of it, goes to Plant a Row for Hungry, which is the Interfaith food shuttle, and they distribute it to Meals on Wheels, homeless shelters, and so on. The other task, I think that's a fun task, is one of networking and partnering. We, of course, have a school, so we tap into that. There's the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and the Cub Scouts and the Brownies. Youth have community service requirements that many like to come to the garden to fulfill. We had one thing I'd like to share with you from our email. One of the people said they had a team at work and they wanted to do something for the community. And so they took us on as a project, and they actually provided the funds and some of the muscle that actually helped us to double the size of our garden. So you never know where that email gets to and the information, who it inspires. I'd like to also say that the extension services, we are so lucky here in North Carolina. Wake County has a network for community gardeners, and actually hosts meetings periodically. Well, at this point, I'd like to turn things back to Pat.
I'd like to maybe add to what Paul was saying. This Saturday, we actually have a Boy Scout coming to complete his Eagle Award. He's going to give us a composting system that we're going to have to learn how to use properly. So I'd like to talk for a few minutes about research. Not only does research provide basic garden knowledge, but it's also another opportunity to connect with others. As you can see, that has been important in our garden. Let's start with the basics as far as what you'll want to research. You, of course, will want to know about the types of vegetables that best grow in their varieties that best grow in Zone 7. Early on, we learned that North Carolina is the lead producer of sweet potatoes. So guess what we grow every year? And we benefit from a good 50 pounds, even from one bed. Highly recommended. Few pests or diseases. You'll also want to take note of the frost dates. The last frost date, they have actually changed recently, probably climate change affecting it. The first frost date is, the last frost date, I always get that backwards, is March the 31st in the spring, and in the fall, the first frost date is October 31st. These, of course, are averages. They're not always exact. So that's something it's their rule of thumb. Another thing that you're going to want to understand, and I've heard this from many gardeners, is understand the results of soil testing. Now, North Carolina, certain months of the year will allow you to have your soil tested for free. However, it's a printout, and the printout, unless you're maybe a biologist or a chemist, it might be a little bit hard to understand. So what we did was we did a second soil test with a company out of Georgia, and they spent a long time on the phone with me to explain how these results were going to affect our growing. So those are important things to research as basics. I have found that reading is a key way to learn more about the garden. And there are a couple of books that were early recommended to us that we've kind of become Bibles to us. The first one here is by Louise Riot, and it's called Carrots Love Tomatoes. And she was an old-timey gardener who provides a lot of anecdotal information about what plants like to grow with what plants. Very well worth having and easy to just get to what you need. The second one is Vegetable Gardener's Bible by Edward Smith. Now, Edward Smith is actually a New England gardener, but he provides such good information, basic information about vegetable growing and pest control and other things that is well worth having. Thank you. And then finally, in this day of internet, many of you will find a lot of good information from blogs on the internet. Pinterest has often many organic solutions to problems that you can experiment with. Well, they're not always guaranteeable, but you can experiment with them. We also recommend that you attend classes. Not only will you learn a lot about vegetable gardening locally, but again, you're going to connect with people, and you'll make those contacts will provide you all kinds of information, some of it free, such as where to get free seeds, compost, believe it or not, free, wood chips, and manure, all basics that the garden needs. But also, those contacts will give you recommendations for vendors. There'll be so much your garden will need, and they'll have recommendations for drip irrigation, fencing, labels, organic products, row covers, and even tomato cages. Those ones that they sell at Home Depot don't work, just so you know. Okay, finally, we would like to share with you some of our startup pictures because they'll say a whole lot more than our humble words.
That was when the garden was just starting and that tree came down on the garden. That was our first harvest of sweet potatoes. That's where the school helped us build some new beds. That was when we put in deer fencing and rodent barrier. That's part of our drip irrigation system. Signs by the brownies. Tomato cages. The kiosk built by a Boy Scout.
Beneficial garden.
Beneficial helper. Building a new bed. Creating a perimeter bed for beneficials around the garden. Boy Scouts built a accessible bed for herbs. We have a beekeeper who comes on and gives classes to students. Germinating. Some of the workers. Well, thank you so much.
And it's to you, Bob.
I hope I stop screens.
Okay.
My name is Bob Weikert. I'm a member of Icct and also St. Thomas More Parish. And we'll talk a little bit about. Let me see if I can do a share screen here, so that we can talk a little bit about San Ysidro Labrador Garden. Let's see if we can share that. Has anybody else got anything up? No, we're okay. Sorry for the delay. So the garden at St. Thomas More was, I thought maybe you should, first thing is who's San Ysidro, Labrador? And then having been inspired by and intimidated by Mary Ellen and Paul and Pat, that's the only problem with participating in these things. You find out things that other people are doing, you say, we ought to be doing that too. Anyway, we'll talk a bit about community garden, and then how do you keep it organic and sustainable? So San Ysidro, that's just Saint Isidore the farmer, farm worker in 12th century Madrid. He was renowned as good and generous. So he was made the patron saint. This is one of the things that is a faith tradition with the Catholics, is that you make a saint out of somebody who does a nice job. So he's the patron saint of farmers and gardeners, and he's our patron. And in fact, his feast day is May 15th, and you have the blessing of seeds and plants. That's one of our little traditions every day. So the other thing, that's that sign I found online. People were offering to match the rest of the campus with aluminum and metal, and I said, I think I'll find something that's more in tune with an organic garden, and you can find those. So here's more on our friend San Ysidro. Just a few basics. We started in 2013, so we're just finishing up our 8th year. Garden's not so big. We've got I think Mary Ellen said we're near the south entrance of the campus. It was really sited so that we would have good sun. That's why we're sort of pinned in on the sides. But it's of course heavy clay. It's the Piedmont, and we put in a fence early on. We put in the fence to exclude deer and rabbits, and it's been largely successul. And we share with insects more than we do with animals. And the basic principle is if we get 75% of it, we don't bother them. If they start to take more than 25%, we have to get muscular and go back after them. Last year, we distributed a good bit of produce, and this is done after the Spanish Mass every Sunday. We had less this year because we had no masses for quite a long time, and the gardeners were taking what we couldn't give to the Interfaith Council for their kitchen. What about the community notion? It's one shared garden. We don't have individual plots, so it's not a bunch of people coming to do their garden. It's a bunch of people coming to do one garden, and I think the idea that it's shared is pretty key, because the objectives are shared, the ideas are shared, and we share the work and the produce. And frankly, we could write the book, The Joy of Gardening, because that little community within the larger church community is pretty tight, has enjoyed themselves, and it's again it's all ages, and we find it very congenial. Regarding community, there's some practical aspects. Mary Ellen had the spiritual dimensions, but frankly, if you don't have a lot of small beds, then you have one bigger space, and you can rotate crops. So you don't plant your nightshades in the same place. You give a 3-year pause, and things like that enable you to do a better job of gardening, because it's all manageable as one piece. You also don't lose as much space in between small beds. We can kind of tippy-toe in between the beds down small paths, The other thing is you don't have to worry about going on vacation or going in to get surgery. There's other people are going to the things will just keep running. It's a very good aspect of a community garden, is that the community is running it. It's not a person running it. Other aspect that I wanted to talk about was organic. I don't think you should try to put up a community garden that doesn't really care for creation, that you dump a lot of chemicals on and you get something to grow fast, and that's really antithetical to the kind of patience and sustainability that you want to have. So we'll talk a bit about the three basic components: sun, soil, and water. Sun is an easy one. If you don't have it, you don't have a garden. So you want to, the first thing is, like with real estate, is location. Just get yourself an open space where you're going to get some daylight, and you want a minimum of 10 hours if you're going to have fruit bearing, if you're going to have tomatoes and peppers. If you're going to just grow lettuces, then you can get by with far fewer hours of sunlight. So know what you're trying to do, but I would recommend that you get a full sun exposure if you possibly can. The key is soil. You've got to fall in love with your soil. You've got to make it. If you're not in Iowa and have your 10 feet of topsoil ready-made, then you're going to largely make it yourself. And that means you're going to start with some kind of a basic substrate. Eastern Carolina might be sand, but here it's heavy clay, and it's going to be hard work. The first couple of beds when I started putting this thing in, the only way I could get through them was with a pick. You don't put a shovel to it, you put a pick to it. But the important thing on the soil is you're not going to put anything in there except what you're going to get out of your compost, what are you going to get out of leaf mulch. You're not going to put chemical fertilizers or pesticides or herbicides in. So whatever's there, you add what's missing. So by the time you put in a few banana peels and eggshells and pineapples, maybe even at this season, you probably pick up a stray pumpkin or two from people that pass your compost bins. You're going to get a variety of elements that may supplement and help your soil test with a lot of different trace elements that you're putting in. You can make compost as a backyard element where it's vegetable matter only, because you're not going to probably achieve the high temperatures. We've got 5 bins right next to the garden, and we encourage people, gardeners and others in the parish, if you're coming to church, just bring your compost with you and drop that off as an offering. You also can get commercial compost, which is sustained heat, which means you can take meat and fish scraps. And compost now it provides that service for our church as well as for individuals. And then your garden, you can get your garden to be a member, so you are entitled to get a certain amount of compost back based on what your other members have provided, and what commercials have done, what commercial enterprises have done in that area. By using frequent additions of compost and cover crops, you can get multiple crops in the year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. If you're going to mulch, and I think you should, the easiest is leaf mulch, I think. We get it by the trailer load. It conserves water, it smothers weeds, and twice a year we shim off about maybe a half to a quarter of an inch from the paths in between the beds, add that soil to the beds. So we're making soil all the time. We also use cover crop, not on everything, because some of the beds we want to keep productive during the winter. if you've got the possibility, if you've got a tool shed nearby, put gutters on it and put a tote or another collection device nearby. We rarely need to use commercial water. By collecting the water and just then siphoning it over to a couple of garbage cans in the garden, we can have the water, no chemicals in it, and we can apply it directly to the plants. And this is done with great care. People, when you have an attitude of caring for things, it doesn't take long to have that become pervasive. What do we get out of this? Well, we distribute this to our largely Latino parishioners after the 1:30 Mass. Now it's 1 o'clock. And the gardeners get to take the ugly ones. It's an old family tradition. As a kid, I used to sell tomatoes in the neighborhood, and the family we took the ugly ones. We made vegetable soup, and we made a lot of tomato juice, etc. This is just a picture from last Saturday, and I want to call attention to a couple of things in that picture before I go off the air here. At the far left, you can see some turnips, and you can see a white cover which has been taken off. There are hoops that you can't see, metal hoops. That's been taken off because it's warm. I took it off again this morning after 2 days of freeze. But that way we can prolong the fall life and start the spring life 2 or 3 weeks earlier. And that's a big help. The second bed is carrots, and the next 3 that you can see are cover crop that have been seeded at different times, whether the Weikert came out or the habanero came out. And in between, you can see our path, which has got cardboard underneath leaf mulch, so that it's dry and it's clean, and everybody's happy with that. In the distance, I think you can see some compost bins. You can see our cedar posts for the fence that we built. You can't see the black, the vinyl chicken wire, black coated. The pastor didn't want to see the fence, and it turns out to be very good because everything is invisible. You can see some beets in the distance, maybe a bit of bok choy. So that's our third crop of the season in the same bed. So you start with a cool weather crop, you do some tomatoes or potato or peppers, out they come, and in goes a fall crop. So we're only quiet maybe January. So what have we got? Well, we think we've got the garden is meeting its objectives. It's building a community. It's caring for creation, and we get to distribute some produce. Meanwhile, I think the gardeners are having fun while they work hard. And I won't be intimidated by all the other good things I heard from the Kellys and from Mary Ellen. It's just, I think that's a good thing, is that we can hear what other people are doing and say, yeah, we ought to try that. You know, we better expand or put in a few new things. So that's a snapshot of San Ysidro. And I'll turn it over to Deborah now so we can hear more about Koinonia.
Hey everyone, I'm just getting my pictures up here. Okay, so I think I wanna present. Okay. All right, so thank you for inviting us to participate with you tonight, and I really enjoyed the presentations. December is kind of an odd time to start to think about community garden, and let's see. but I guess December is a good time to reflect on the year that you passed, and also go ahead to the next, looking ahead to the next season. Koinonia has been started since 2015. It's a joint project between the Christ United Methodist Church in Chapel Hill and the Evergreen United Methodist Church. It's in North Chatham County on at the Evergreen United Methodist Church on Highway 15501. And this is in 2014, really was kind of the inception of the garden. It's kind of a vision between Pat Horton and Pastor Han McManus, who was the pastor at Evergreen then. Evergreen had a food pantry at that church for many years, and Pastor McManus wanted to be able to share more fresh produce with the people who came to that food pantry. And this was in, the spring 2015, this land was cleared. It was wooded land, and the trees were cut down, and, you know, with caterpillars and everything, came and got the stumps out. So then water was brought to the site and their fence was built. This is a youth group that were building the fence. And we had the consecration in October 2015. We planted our first few beds in August of that year, and we had a few fall crops that year. This was the next spring. They had put in some irrigation to our beds. We built raised beds, and the beds are constructed from, well, we don't have sides on the beds. And so the beds were built from the clay soil and added with Brooks compost, about 2 truckloads of Brooks compost that we put in there. And so our garden, the name Koinonia comes from the Greek word for community, or meaning common fellowship in the New Testament. And the structure of our garden, as it was intended to be, was that we would have memberships, and you could, for a family, you can either have a membership for a season or for the whole entire, or for part of the year, for the whole year, for part of the season. But we also, besides having members working in the garden, we've had volunteers. Some people just don't want to join the garden. They might just come and volunteer for certain things. We've had high school students coming and working and getting some of their credits for volunteering. And we've also partnered with the Chatham County group that helps their at-risk youth. And some of those youth have come and volunteered in our garden as well. The beauty of the community garden is the variety of interests and skills among the group. In the beginning, we had less flexibility and tried formulas for starting a garden that didn't always necessarily seem to apply to our community. So as things have gone on, I think we have become more flexible and had fewer rules than what we had at the beginning. And so with the community garden, you can have one person may have a passion for the gardening, and somebody else may really like the harvesting. Others might enjoy mowing, which we have a lot of mowing to do out there. But we have been able to put some of the grass clippings for use in compost and mulching. And so we have, some people do transportation. Now the food pantry has moved to Chatham, to Pittsburgh, and been merged with the Chatham County Cora in Pittsburgh. So we have a person that has assisted us with transporting the vegetables down there. The experience we had is like, I guess you have to take experience and try to learn from what works and look at your failure as an opportunity to improve. And my thinking on that is, if something isn't working, maybe ask why and use resources, tools, and technology. Certainly can be used to improve efficiency as well as the experience of the gardeners. I don't, it's hard to get people who are not used to physical labor to come out in the garden and do back work. And, in addition to that, many of our gardeners also are seniors, and, some of them, had asked for things to be more accessible, which took me a while to understand what they meant. But what we've done is we are incorporating some 21st century tools into our garden that make things a little bit easier. Especially, I really love the broad fork. We have electric lawnmower and a trimmer that have made a huge difference. So the challenges, yeah, we have challenges out there. One of the things we found challenging was that in the beginning, we didn't have a plan as to how we're going to maintain the beds, how we're going to maintain the soil. And what we found was, because of the way our garden was constructed and the beds being vertical on a slope. I don't know if you can really tell from here, but this garden is slightly sloped towards the driveway there. And we lost through runoff from the rains. We had a lot of problems with erosion in the first couple of years, and we actually lost quite a bit of the topsoil from our beds that went down the hill. And so that needed to be addressed. And so this was one of the things that I think our vision for the garden has expanded from the original one, and being really more mindful and intentional about creation care on the site, and that what we have here in the soil is so valuable and we must care for it. We have addressed the problem. It has been mitigated by mulching and composting on the site. The soil is the foundation of the garden. Without good soil, you will have nothing. And we must practice sustainable agriculture and be good stewards of the creation that we have. And this is last year. I'm going to talk a little bit about the climate change here. Another challenge to the garden is including climate change. We've had to contend with extreme heat, drought, unexpected extreme freezing. Last year was hot, and hotter, with about 3 droughts. And this year we had over 11 inches of rain in our garden in August, and this is not normal. So let's see where. Anyway, this was the sweet potato harvest last year was very good. The sweet potatoes really liked the heat. They seemed to do well, and this was in a non-irrigated, what we call a lasagna bed, that didn't have any irrigation, and we watered it maybe once a week. But we got a tremendous amount of sweet potatoes from that. So what we've been doing now is expanding a little bit from just only growing annuals. Since we have the space, we've been growing some perennials and putting in some blueberry plants. And this year we put also an asparagus and a fig tree. And this is in March, I think towards right at the end of February when we planted our fig tree. And then we had lockdown, and the garden was closed, and we were, staying at home except for going out there to do maintenance. And our pastor said, yeah, we had to go out there and maintain, because these are living things. We had already planted several beds. We had put in peas and potatoes, and of course we had our onions. We couldn't just leave that there. And so I went on sort of a seed starting binge in my apartment, and these are some of the tomatoes. But eventually started most of the plants, most of the transplants that we used this year. The transplants weren't as nice as quite the ones that you would buy. They were much smaller, but they did grow once they were out there. This was our overwintered onions and garlic from last year. This was in the spring, maybe April, I'm saying. And so coronavirus, that was our challenge this year. We did, we went out there, I think in May. We thought, we didn't know we thought we could restart the garden. We were doing social distancing on, I think it's phase 1. You could have 10 people outside. We've always stayed there. And so, we're comfortable being outside in the garden. It's a good place to be. We wear masks if we have to interact with each other and work closely. Otherwise, if you're working by yourself, you can take it off, which we certainly needed to do when it was hot. This is something else that I started learning about, starting a lot of different seeds. That this was some rhubarb plants that I started, and I think they may live through the winter. We'll see. And so one of the other things regarding the creation care was we had to discontinue certain pest controls that had been used, Amdro for fire ants. It wasn't working anyway, and then we found out you weren't supposed to use it in the vegetable beds anyway. So we switched to another, I think, spinosad, come and get it bait that works a lot better. And so we're mulching now. Anyway, I wanted to go back. Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. Okay, this was last spring, a year ago. So the experiment that we did was getting hay and mulching 3 beds, 2 tomato beds and a kale, and leaving that, which it did fine. It had much less stress from the heat, and they produced all through the summer, even through a couple of months last fall when our irrigation was completely down. And then the kale lived through the winter and till the next spring, still producing. So that, yeah, the mulching, we are now going to go into year-round mulching to keep our beds healthy and to keep them from, just to restore the beds. But also it maintains a more constant temperature in the soil, besides conserving the water. So, and we started, okay, we're here you can see in the over there by the fence, you can see some bags of leaves. So we started last year asking the church to collect leaves, and we got about 25 bags of leaves last year. And now this year, I think we got over 30 bags of leaves already. And yeah, so in the foreground here is some of our collards and some other brassicas in this bed. There's some broccoli in there and some cauliflower and some kale. And then here we are, again, this is kind of like from another angle there, as we were doing cleanup that day, taking out the big plants and getting them ready to shred to do our fall cleanup. So our garden has advanced now. We grow not only vegetables, we have fruits, herbs, and flowers. And we have, our garden is a sanctuary for various pollinating insects. We have a beautiful array of all kinds of butterflies and various bees that come out there. And they love to eat our parsley. And whenever there's dill, if dill comes up anywhere, we want to leave the dill there, because that's another thing that these butterflies, the larvae of the butterflies, they eat the dill. So anyway, we now have expanded into perennials. We added our blueberries, big tree, asparagus, and rhubarb. And my conclusion is taken from Midrash Tarkano. Even if you are old, you must plant. Just as you found trees planted by others, you must plant them for your children. So now I turn this over to Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Jones. I'm the Horticulture Extension Agent with NC State Extension in Chatham County. And that means I oversee education programs and outreach programs related to gardening and home horticulture, as well as for nurseries and landscapers. And tonight I want to share with you some of the resources that NC State Extension has for you as it pertains to community gardens and gardening generally. And this is all research-based information, science-based information that is reliable and customized for North Carolina conditions. So as I'm setting up my presentation, I'm going to send you 2 links, and don't worry, there will be a lot of links in the presentation, but we will send out a PDF of these slides for you so you can refer back to them. But in the meantime, there are 2 links I'll be referring to most commonly and you find most helpful. That is the Community Garden Handbook and the Extension Gardener Handbook. Stand by, and we'll get rolling. And I understand, in the interest of time, I'll curtail some of my blabbing. So as I said, I'm based in Chatham County, but there are representatives like me in your own counties if you're not in Chatham, if you're not lucky enough to be in Chatham. And we're all here to help you all. So while my mother-in-law calls Neiman Marcus the mothership in our case is the NC State Community Gardens portal. And this is where you'll not only find a lot of resources devoted specifically to community garden management, community garden setup, etc., and information on, say, model programs and model policies that are helpful, but also the Community Garden Handbook that I will show you in the next slide. There's a directory of community gardens across the country that this links to, and you can add your community garden to this directory as well. And then there are, of course, a lot of other cross-reference NC State Extension resources found at this portal. But the most important document from this website is the Collard Greens and Common Grounds an NC Community Food Gardening Handbook. This is a 60-something, I think, page handbook that has everything you can imagine that is helpful for designing and managing, organizing, troubleshooting community gardens. And as the Kellys pointed out, and as Deborah and others have pointed out, in many cases, growing the plants is the simple part. It's the organization and management of the volunteers, and making sure that you have a site design from the beginning that will make the whole process a lot smoother for long term. So that's one of the things I've sent to you in the chat. And then also on the portal, you'll find some more succinct overviews. And if you don't want to see the whole handbook, if you're trying to convince a committee or something at the church or your religious organization to consider community gardens, there are some more succinct explanations. There's a lot of great information on food safety considerations. Foodborne illness can come almost as frequently from mishandled produce as it can meat, and unfortunately, if it's not cooked. So keep that in mind. And then there are several information pamphlets about some of the legal and liability issues to consider. Now, a lot of that may be superseded by your own organization's policies, but there still can be potentially helpful for a framework. And then, of course, the best resource on gardening information is the 800-page plus NC Extension Gardener Handbook. Now, this was based on the Master Gardener Handbook. It was revised 3 or 4 years ago, thanks to the efforts of Dr. Lucy Bradley, who's our urban horticultural specialist on campus. And while you can buy a really handsome full-color hardback version of the handbook, the whole thing is free online. So, and it has many topics there's a whole chapter on vegetable gardening, a chapter on organic gardening, chapters on small fruits and tree fruits, and et cetera, many excellent appendices. So if you just need an overview for North Carolina specific gardening information, this is a place to start. And that's the other link I sent in the chat. We also have a gardening portal, and this is kind of our portal of portals related to home gardening. So all the other extension related publications I mentioned are ultimately linked here and can be found here. But one of the more helpful resources specifically are our planting calendars. And these are vegetable planting calendars that have been customized for North Carolina regions. In fact, North Carolina conditions, and in fact, specified for the 3 regions of North Carolina. So the one I'm showing you now, and the link that you'll have in the presentation, is for Central North Carolina. But if you just change the URL here to say Western or Eastern, you'll have a calendar that's slightly adjusted to reflect mountain and coastal plain conditions. And the way the calendar works is that you have a long list of alphabetical list of different crops, some information on the amount of time it takes to grow them, and then the typical planting distances, ultimate planting distances. But most usefully, there's a matrix of a calendar indicating dividing months in halves and indicating over what periods you can plant different crops. The S stands for seed, the T stands for transplants. You may see other abbreviations like TU for tuber or B for bulb, but all different, indicating different times you can plant different types of propagules. So in this example, basil transplants or seeds can be planted from, say, early May until late July. So that's available in this link as well. There's also a therapeutic horticulture portal. So Dr. Bradley also has a lot of experience in horticultural therapy. And here you'll find information about different training opportunities, training and certification opportunities. And currently NC State is working with the UNC Botanical Garden to offer several of these courses. There was one that I was going to be helping with that was delayed due to COVID, but we will hope to offer it again next year. And then there's also a composting portal. NC State is home to Rhonda Sherman, who is practically one of the world experts on composting and especially worm compost. A lot of great information for homeowners here. And then I am myself hosting an online workshop in conjunction with someone else in Chatham County, Shannon Culpepper, at the Solid Waste and Recycling on December 10th. The spaces are almost filled up, but we'll be doing this again in the spring too, if you don't get an opportunity. So one takeaway tonight, in addition to those 2 major resources, is that if you ever encounter a horticultural problem at your garden, come see us. If you need help interpreting your soil report, that's what we're for. I have looked at more NCDA soil reports than I can imagine. And so I can gladly help you with that, or your local agent can as well, and your local master gardeners. So NC State oversees all the master gardener programs in each state. And you're welcome to contact us if you like, if you can't, or contact Wake County or Orange or Alamance or Durham or what have you. During COVID, their main contact is through email. And then if you want to find your local master gardener volunteers, there's a link for that here. And then feel free to reach out to me if you've got questions, or if you want to find your local county agent. You can do that here as well. And I have offered a series of free online vegetable gardening classes this year, and I'll be offering them again next year. And so if you want to be up to date on when those are available, email me and I'll add you to my newsletter list. Whew, how was that? So that's what I have, and I will hand it over to.
I think to me, Matt.
Yes, there we go. There you go, Ann.
Thank you. Wow, I think we've had a lot of information shared this evening and learned about a lot of exciting places to go visit. And as I mentioned earlier, the contact information for all the presenters will be at our Facebook page, which is Orange Chatham ICC, and ICCT will have it on their website. And the program is being recorded if you want to hear some of the presentations again. We do have time for some question and answer. If people have any questions and want to direct it to a particular person, we're open if anyone wants to put a question into their chat. Okay. Well, that's fine. If we don't have any questions, I'm not seeing any pop up. Okay. They would like to see your diagram again, Pat and Paul. Are they? Pat and Paul, can you bring up your diagram again? Okay.
I'm working on it right now. I think I've got it. Hold on just a second.
Okay. Okay. And that will be available at those sites that we described. Thank you. We did have a question come up. I don't know, Bob, can you answer it? Someone was asking about anyone had a pollinator garden. Let's see if I can see it again.
You could say we have a.
Yes, the question was, does anybody do pollinators or is it all just veggies?
Okay.
We have got pollinators incorporated in the space. So butterfly bushes and rosemary bushes and zinnias, and nothing big and formal. As someone as Chatham County has got some gorgeous pollinator beds, but we veggie growers begrudgingly yielded some of the square footage so that we could have pollinator beds. I don't know whether Paul and Pat do the same and whether Deborah does the same. I think some of it is just you also let things mature, and if you will, go to seed. And when they go to seed, that's nectar. That's things that people like to eat. That is, say, pollinators like to eat. So we have a couple of beds set aside for pollinator plants, but we don't have a big pollinator garden.
So we actually, the perimeter outside our fence, on all sides, are perimeter beds for pollinators.
We didn't want to give up any of our footage, though.
So we have herbs and flowers, and the flowers, when they go to seed, they often spill into the bed area. So it's quite beautiful. And our gardeners, that's how they reward themselves after working hard. They go ahead and make a bouquet to take home.
And of course, we encourage everyone to harvest herbs and as often as they will.
Right. Matt, do you have an answer or any suggestion? What advice can you offer churches with no land for a community garden?
Well, you can try, I mean, most vegetables do great in containers. So if you've got enough space to do containers, you've got full sun, and you can set up an irrigation system because they will dry out fast. They need to be watered probably daily during the heat of the summer. But that's definitely a system where you can grow quite a lot in very small space. And if you want more information on that, the handbook does have a chapter on container gardens, and I can send you a presentation I've done on container gardening. So that may be one route you can go.
Thank you. How about rooftop? Would be a rooftop garden? Is that possible?
If the structure can stand the weight of the soil, and you have adequate drainage set up, and you can provide irrigation, because it will get hot. If that is theoretically a possibility, though. And then, as someone else mentioned, partnering with other religious institutions that might have land could be another option too.
Right, because that Deborah, the last gardener to speak, that is a partnership between a church in Southern Village in Chapel Hill and then one out here in northern Chatham County.
Because there's no space for a garden at Christ Church. There's they had a lot of land out there, and so we worked together.
Mm-hmm.
There's one other possibility. And Carborough, for example, Carborough Community Garden, it's possible you could check with the town and they might be able to set aside some space if you can guarantee sort of care for it, that it'll be sustained. It's not just going to be something that you mess up for a year. But that's what they did in Carborough. I worked over there for several years, and they have got, as part of the Martin Luther King Park, they have land set aside specifically for 2 different flavors of community garden. And whether a church could get something like that, I think it would be worth asking your local municipality.
Of course, someone just mentioned you can put a garden in the islands in your parking lot if you have room there. You have to be creative.
Yeah. You wouldn't have any trouble getting rid of the produce.
Yeah. Someone has asked, or several people have asked about annual cost to have a community garden. Maybe each of you could speak to that, like Pat and Paul. How about your garden? You have an idea of what the annual costs are?
The original costs were substantial as we were building the garden, but I'd say that at this point where we're pretty well have it down, it's probably between $500 and $1,000 a year.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Bob?
We like to say that we're the only ministry in the church where we charge people to join. So we have $20 dues per year, and we also do everything on the cheap. We try to get free compost, free leaf mulch. We start things from seed. We don't buy plants. So yeah, we hold it pretty low. The costs were, anytime you start to buy the necessary containers so that you're going to support your tomatoes and peppers, and if you're going to put up a fence, we did it ourselves, and it was $1,000 less than having it contracted, but it's still expensive.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Deborah? Deborah,
I think the greatest cost is the initial, but then we have spent some money on things like, say, for example, with upgrading some of our tools. But yeah, the fence, and I think, I wasn't a part of that discussion at the beginning, and I don't know exactly what happened with, there was a lot donated in the beginning to pay for various things that needed to be done, including the irrigation, the fence materials, and so on like that.
Yeah.
We would like to, we have had in the past somebody that was growing our plants for us, but at this time we don't have anybody. The last couple of years we haven't had anybody that had a place to do that. So that's something that we need to find.
Okay. All right. Well, if you have other questions, I suggest that you contact the people. Once again, look at Orange Chatham ICC Facebook page or ICCT website. And there will be the contact information for everyone who made a presentation tonight. I'm going to let Lynn Lyle of ICCT kind of wrap up this evening's program and also let you know what's being planned for January. Okay, thank you all. Lynn?
Thank you, Ann. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, good evening, everyone. First, I just can't say enough about how much we really appreciate our partnership with OCICC. Not only tonight's wonderful conversation with so many knowledgeable people, but also our joint ventures since the pandemic struck. So thank you, OCICC. Some of you joined our meeting last month with Elizabeth Bagley from Project Drawdown, known as the world's leading resource for climate solutions. and a link to the recording is in the chat. If you're like me, I never can figure out how to copy what's in the chat. So you can just go to our website, which is www.interfaithcreationcare.org. That's easy to remember, I hope. Meanwhile, since then, and before then, actually, Gail Powell, who's here tonight, and her team, some of whom are here tonight, have developed Icct Drawdown webinars available for groups in faith communities to explore climate solutions that they as a faith community or their members can adopt. Now, the PowerPoint webinars can be offered live to a group at a faith community on Zoom by Icct trainers, or they can be offered by anyone who would like to use the PowerPoint materials that are available now on our website. Recorded versions of the webinars should be up soon, and there's a link in the chat to get more information about the webinars. If you'd like to explore, oh, and that's on our website as well. So if you'd like to explore how these resources can be tailored to your faith community, please contact us at our email address, which is in the chat and in About Us on our website, and Gail will get back with you. Now, others from Icct have been making our voices heard to the Raleigh Planning Commission and the City Council about environmental racial injustice threatened by Downtown South, the largest development ever proposed in Raleigh. That development would surround Walnut Creek, threatening increased urban flooding that's already really bad, gentrification, higher taxes, and displacement of people from the very first African-American residential development in Raleigh and other downstream neighborhoods. No affordable housing is offered by the developer, even though he's asking for hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks from Raleigh and Wake County to fund the project. So we're calling on you, all of you who live in Wake County, to access a quick and easy to send letter at a link in the chat to go to City Council members. And it's on our website as well, and it's in the chat. And so finally, our next event is January 26th. The program is Solving the Climate Challenge, National Climate Policy and Advocacy, with two really outstanding speakers from CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby. Donna Dew is program director for the Mid-South region, and Shay Reinberg is from the CCL youth team. So watch your emails for registration links. I think Anne is kind enough to share that with OCICC, and Icct gets it too. So I'd just like to say that until then, I wish you many blessings during the rest of this month. For a lot of us, it's a very special time in our faith traditions. And I'd like to wish you a happy new year. We're all hoping 2021 will be a very good year for creation. Thank you for being with us tonight, teaching and learning about community gardens together and being nourished by it. Have a good evening. Thank you for being here.